It's green.
Beautiful.
Good.
All right.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to our organizational meeting. We'll start with a moment of silence and/or prayer. Okay. And now is the roll call. As I mentioned, I think Steve Giovanelli appears to be the only one absent.
Do you want to read the roll for whoever does the minutes off the recording?
I will, and I'm going to ask the new people to introduce themselves when we get to that. Okay. So, we have Andy Robertson, we have John Dubianski, and John, do you want to say something about yourself and/or anything at all? Introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, I think everybody here knows me. I grew up in town. I grew up on Nottingham Road, and I now live on Swamp Road. Been on the fire department and the rescue squad for 21 years. I worked for the school for about 10. I still work at Parks and Rec. I've been there for probably since they started the after-school program. And I work full-time for the city of Manchester as a wastewater treatment plant operator.
And then we have Kevin Verville, we have Dave, myself, Bill Von Hassel, and Mr.
Bilodeau.
Phil Bilodeau.
I live in Nottingham Road. Been in Deerfield since 1970. Did planning board, zoning board of adjustment. I work in Concord. My two kids grew up through the school system here. Thank you.
And Alden Dill.
Alden Dill, I live on Griffin Road.
That was short. And
I'm Zach. Nice
Zach,
to meet you.
Zach, I'm trying to think how you said to pronounce the last.
Langlois.
Langlois.
Yes, sir.
Right, yes. I didn't want to make that mistake again. And Troy Hopkins. And so that's the roll. We don't have any outstanding minutes
We
to
do.
approve, do we?
We do.
We do.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the minutes of 20 December
That's right, December.
2016 as written.
Second?
All right, moved and seconded. Does anybody have any corrections to the December minutes? Boy, that was a while ago.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Verville.
Just for information for our new members, obviously, I don't think you guys have seen a copy of those. They probably are online draft format, but it's just for, generally, this is housekeeping for carryover members.
Anybody got any corrections? I basically transcribed them at that point, right, like I'm doing now, because we don't have a secretary. We still don't have a secretary. Hopefully, we'll be able to fill that before the next season starts in the fall. We've got all summer to look. Seeing no comments, all those in favor of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstain? I'm going to guess the new members are abstaining. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I'll move the minutes of the 3rd of January 2017 as written.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any comments on the January minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing the January 30th minutes online.
January 3rd.
January 3rd.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
I'm not sure if they're online, but they were circulated to members.
I believe that I also circulated them to Steve
They're on the
Gemelli to
town's
put
website.
online.
They're on the website.
Yeah. And that's January 3rd. Sorry, it's taking me a while to type as I'm doing this. All right, seeing no comments to those, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And abstain again. Yep.
Mr. Chairman?
I'll cut and paste that. Yes.
I'll move the minutes of 10 January 2017 as written.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any comments on January 10th? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstain? Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, there are two sets of detailed minutes that are as of yet outstanding, so maybe we can take that up at our next meeting.
I would suggest that. Okay, we'll move in then to election of officers. I will move Mr. Verville as chair.
I'll second the nomination.
Any discussion? Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Langlois.
for the sake of, I think, creating an option, I'd also like to move another member.
Okay, we should deal with the motion on the floor first, and then move on to another motion if that one fails. That's the way it's usually done.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Verville?
The only thing I'll say is if I'm elected chair, I'll run the meetings as I ran them for the 3 years previous to last year, notwithstanding the posting of the public hearing, which proved to be a challenge for me for a couple of years, but finally did master that. So if elected chair, I'll run fair and open meetings, make sure everything is posted, make sure people have hard copies of agendas, minutes, and any other documents required for the working of the meeting.
Okay. Any other comments, discussions,
I
questions?
guess I would have a question. So how would we choose between one or two candidates if one candidate, you're only gonna move that one motion? I guess I'm not clear.
If I may?
Yeah.
I intend to nominate, depending the outcome of Mr. Verville's vote, or the vote for Mr. Verville, I intend to nominate Alden Dill to act as chairman for this committee. So that effectively does give an option, seeing that that motion would be seconded when an opportunity is made to make it.
Okay. Any further discussion on it? Okay, not seeing any. All those in favor of Kevin Verville as chair signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Any abstentions? 1 abstain. That passes then. Congratulations, Mr. Verville.
Thank you.
I'll give you your key later.
Yeah, I forget about the key.
Yeah. You get to learn how to run the door with that stupid little sticky thing.
As chair, I'd like to nominate Mr. Dubianski as vice chair.
Okay, let me capture that.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? John, are you willing to accept?
Yes,
Okay. No discussion?
I just wasn't comfortable seconding myself.
No, that's fine. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Any abstentions? And 1 abstention, so there's 10 of us, so it's 7, 2, 1.
Let me try to capture those. Hold on.
Congratulations.
7, yes. Oppose was 2. And, oh, okay, so there was, Kevin, there were 6 yes, 2 opposed, 2 abstain.
Okay. If you pass that down to Andy. So just to, well, is there any old business? Is anybody who is a current member have any old business? So we'll go to new business. just an agenda going around. We are in lack of a recording secretary. Our recording secretary has resigned. There's
That's
two.
what I'm doing.
There's two sets of outstanding minutes that need a full type-up. And I took the liberty to reach out to Mr. Harrington to see if the town had a resource available. He indicated he'd reach out to the new recording secretary for the select board, but I've not heard back. So in lieu of that, the one thing I don't have time for is to type up all the minutes. So as a committee, we need to come to consensus of how we're going to deal with that until we get a recording secretary. One solution would be to simply publish abbreviated minutes. So motions, vote totals, and that's about it. So if anybody knows of somebody that wants to be a recording secretary, or if there's a member on the committee that would volunteer to do that work, it would be greatly appreciated.
Greatly, because I don't want to keep typing through meetings either.
And it does not require attendance at the meetings. The meetings are actually video recorded, and so you can transcribe the minutes from watching the video on YouTube as soon as it's posted, which is pretty quick. Mr. Spillane?
I would also add that I can continue to try to capture high-level minutes if we don't have someone at the meeting that then can be brought into the detailed minutes, which is the way I had to do it when we lost our recording secretary. It was right here on the agenda that I did. I just type up any major decisions we made or votes and people who did them so that we can at least get that online in time for the laws, requirements to have our minutes available. The RSA just requires that we have any major decisions that were made and attendance posted as minutes. So that part isn't really detailed like we like to have, but it fits the law and it can be done quickly so that we are in compliance with the law.
Thank you. Any other comments on recording secretary?
You said you reached out to Diane and she just hasn't gotten back to you?
I talked to Mr. Harrington, and he was
Okay.
going to reach out, so I haven't heard back, so we'll wait to see on that. And I'll ask to have it posted anew. Next, just primarily for our new members, but always a good review for all of us, budget committees are defined in state statute under New Hampshire RSA Title III, Chapter 32. I've put the web link for that, and I would encourage all members to take the time to read through that. That is what gives us our legal charge. Also, we have to comply with New Hampshire RSA Title VI, Chapter 91A, access to governmental records and meetings, better known as the right to know law as well. And so I would encourage all members of the committee to take a look at that. Just as a refresher for parliamentary procedure, we follow Robert's Rules of Order, and as is our custom, or as modified and voted by the MBC. So if we're following parliamentary procedure and we want to change that procedure, we certainly have that, so long as it's legal, we can do that. A quorum is 6 members, so for us to have a meeting, we have to have 6 or more members present. Any less than that, and it's not a meeting. That also loops back up to item C, which is right to know. So we shouldn't be having conversations with, more than, it has to be less than a quorum, otherwise it's essentially a non-posted meeting. I'll draw attention to the absences because Chapter 32, Section 15(6) is quite specific on that. And so 4 consecutive absences essentially moves you off the MBC. To the best of my knowledge, it's never happened. I'm not sure. I know Andy and Mr.
I
Spillane.
don't believe it has in my time.
Which is probably 10 years for.
I think we had one member that was gone from absence and one member that was gone for behavior.
Okay, so.
That was before 10 years ago then.
Yes.
So it can happen,
Can't threaten
so.
to kill people at a meeting.
So I put my NBC email there, I'll check it right before meetings start, before every meeting. I've also put my cell phone number there, so you can call or text, either is fine. The NBC has an email policy, and I've made copies of that policy, if you can take one and just pass
Written policy.
pass it down. So again, this is for reference, so you can read that at your leisure. We also have a policy from the Select Board relative to legal inquiries to the New Hampshire Municipal Association. This is relatively, I guess it's not that new, it's from January 2015. So what, the nutshell of the policy is that individual members cannot make a legal inquiry to the municipal association. Past practice of this body has been to send those, if you have a legal inquiry, to send that legal inquiry to the chairman, and the chairman will then send the inquiry verbatim as received from the requesting member to the municipal association, and then the reply from the municipal association will be provided to that member verbatim. So if you have a legal,
So you're relatively safe in your bet that you were going to become the chair?
I did prepare to be the chair, I did, yes.
Seems a little odd, Cal.
So was this published today, or was it published on the 15th?
I copied this today. This is not published. I'm handing this out for background information for members of the committee.
Well, it's on the town letterhead as of January 12th, 2015. Did you amend this letter?
That's
No,
the
that
email
letter's
policy.
from the select board.
It's
Oh, no,
not letter,
select
that's
board
from the
one.
select board.
The select
That was when
board-
the select board sent this to the MBC. They made this decision and sent this to the MBC.
I'm confused. Were you the
Okay.
chair, were you the chair on January 12th, 2015?
I was.
Yes, he was.
I was.
I
So,
misunderstood.
That makes more sense.
And the,
okay, Mr. Spillane, so the email policy of the committee
Yep,
predates my membership on the committee.
okay.
So that goes way back.
I drafted that.
The letter relative to the municipal association was a policy passed by the select board.
Okay.
The NBC has repeatedly requested that that policy be rescinded. The select board has chosen not to do that. So that is the policy. So what we've decided as a committee in the past is if any member has a legal inquiry, the legal inquiry goes to the chair per BOS policy. The chair will forward it to the municipal association verbatim and then send the reply back from the municipal association to the member verbatim. So it follows the policy but allows basically any member to ask any question. And then there's a proposed meeting schedule for this year. It's the same as the last, probably at least 5 or 6 years, I think, but with adjustments for
The dates.
calendar dates. So unless somebody wants to modify the date of our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, 19 September. So if anybody wants, we can modify this on the fly for new members. If we go through the year, we may find we want to modify this, and we can. This is not set in stone. This is just a fleshed out schedule, so people have transparency and can make appropriate planning. Some of these are legal requirements, so the public hearing and whatnot are defined by IRSA, what the window is for that.
but we don't know those exact dates yet. The SB2 deadline dates are
I
not.
think these are correct, but I have to double check them, because it's by IRSA, so it's, you can
The
work
municipal
backwards.
association publishes a quick guide that lists everything you can
Yeah,
check
you-
against.
usually much later in the year. So any other new business?
Mr. Von Hassel.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Von Hassel.
Thank you, Chairmans. I think that with a few exceptions, most of us would agree that some of the meetings dragged on interminably last year through the last term. I'd like to float the idea out there that we put a time limit on a discussion by an individual of a certain line item to 2 minutes with the possible of an extension of 1 minute approved by the chair.
Second.
So it's moved and seconded, so to be clear, the motion on the table,
To place a time limit on an individual per discussion of a line item to 2 minutes, only with an exception of 1 minute approved by the chair.
so it's a 2 minute, 2 minute per line item. And the 1 minute is at the discretion of the chair, 1 minute extension.
Correct.
Mr. Spillane.
Well, it's been moved and seconded, so I assume it's open for discussion.
It is, please.
Doesn't sound unreasonable to me, but would that be for the initial discussion, and then therefore, if there are other points brought up and it comes back to that member, how does that handle? Does that member not get to speak if they've used their 2 minutes, or, I mean, what's the, I'm just wondering where this might lead to.
Well, I would envision that the chair could, I mean, you don't really want to stifle someone's conversation about a particular
Exactly.
item, but again, you don't want it to drag on till 9:30 at night. So I would propose that there be an additional 1 minute exception if it comes back to that topic, but end it at that point.
Further discussion? Ms. Hopkins?
And this applies to every member of
Correct.
the board, including the chair and the assistant chair.
Correct. That's my intent.
I like that intent, thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, so then I'll weigh in a little bit. I would advise against this motion. So that allows you a total of 2 minute questioning time for any line item on the budget. Some of these budget items require more time than that. It's at the discretion of the committee. What I would recommend would be to defeat this motion. A motion to limit debate can be made at any meeting, just like a motion to adjourn can be made at any time. It's always in order. I would suggest it would be more prudent to vote to limit debate when debate actually is being non-productive, to limit the amount of time any member on this committee has to inquire about a line item to less amount of time than what boards allow and committees allow for public comment during their meeting. To me, sounds very imprudent. So it will be my intention to vote against this, and I would recommend that motions to limit debate should be made when debate is dragging on. Any further discussion?
I have a
Mr. Billy,
question.
please.
Was it the intent that the speakers are limited, or we are limited?
No.
Now, the motion is to limit the amount of time that a committee member has to ask.
Us.
Us.
Okay, I'm clear, thank you.
So if the chair does not indulge the extra minute, it's 2 minutes per line item, period. Mr. Spillane?
I'm just still unclear. If we bring up a question about a line item, and say I bring it up, and I put my questions forward, one, who's keeping track of the time? If I ask 30 seconds worth to put it out now, and I get an answer back, and then I ask a follow-up question for that, and
I'll be happy to buy a stopwatch.
but then, if other members start getting in as well, then you've got each other member speaking into their 2 minutes.
Excuse me,
and-
just one at a time. Mr. Spillane, it would be my assumption that that would be, that the management of a clock would be under the duties of the chair. So it would be at the at the call of the chair to do that, because we don't have a clerk, we don't have a secretary, and so presumably that would fall to the chair, or delegation of that responsibility to a willing member could be pushed to a member, but it would be at the will of the chair. Unless the committee wants to vote to delegate a timekeeper.
Although I like the idea, I think it's overly complicated.
I don't think it has to be. There shouldn't be more than one person talking at one time anyway.
Okay, so I agree, but if we could be recognized, because that'll help order. Mr. Spillane.
But we've sat through enough budget meetings that we know that I have a question, somebody else has a question or a comment, and that person has and it does tend to go from member to member on this board, which is the whole purpose of having this many people on the board, and trying to keep track of who spoke for how long on any given line item. I mean, basically, in essence, we're saying that there's 11 possible members on the board here with 2 minutes each, so we're talking about 22 minutes of discussion on any particular line item, divided between all the people, and it just seems like it's, when we actually get into the meat of budget items, it could be distracting and complicated.
Mr. Dill.
I'll say, watching the video last year, there seemed to be certain members holding court for an extended period of time that weren't being held up by the chair. So I think that this is while brief, there's a good point to it. And I think that we should support it.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, and I would note that if it doesn't work, if it appears to be failing and preventing reasonable debate, we can revisit it and change the time limit or do away with it.
Mr. Chair, I was going to.
Mr. Von Hassel.
I was going to basically mimic that response. Look, this is something that we can adjust if it appears it's unworkable, or we can make adjustments as it goes along to make it work better.
And so that's why I would recommend that we defeat the article and limit debate when debate drags on, when it actually becomes an issue. Because basically, there will not, with a 2-minute time limit, there is no debate. You have time to frame a question, give some brief answers, and that's it.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Robertson.
Yeah, I'd make a motion to move the question.
Second.
Moved and seconded, non-debatable. All in favor of two-minute time limit per line item with a potential for a 1-minute extension at the discretion of the chair. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed, say nay, raise a hand.
No?
1, 2, 3, 4 abstentions. 1 abstention, so the motion carries. So I will invest in a stopwatch, and we will see how it goes. Is there, Mr. Illingworth?
If I may briefly ask Mr. Robertson a question from his previous experience on the committee?
Sure.
I believe last year you mentioned in years past that the questions to the respective boards in town had at one point come from a committee as a whole, and they were voted on as a committee. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure, and not so much questions, but information requests. When we made information requests of the select board or the school board, we took a majority vote of the budget committee to determine whether the committee wanted that material, as opposed to just requesting it directly from a select board member, or school board member, or the SAU, and that had been protocol for a fair number of years.
Mr. Deal?
I was a selectman in Northwood for 6 years. We had the same policy.
So I would move that the budget committee return to that previous policy where requests for additional information be a vote of the committee.
Second that.
So I'll take the second, just a second. I want to make sure I understand the motion. So the motion is any request for information from any outside source other than municipal association requires a majority vote of the committee. Is that correct? He made the motion, so he needs to answer.
No, it would be that requests for additional information from the select board or its departments in the school board or the SAU come from the budget, as a vote of the Budget Committee.
So any request for further information other than what's supplied requires a majority vote from the MBC to request the information. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just jot it down and I'll take the second. Okay, moved and seconded by Ms. Hopkins. Discussion. You have it first.
I feel that continuing with the previous practice would help the meetings move a little bit quicker, a little bit smoother, as well as allow the committee to get the information it's looking for by asking for it as a committee.
Further discussion?
Certainly, if I
Mr.
could, I
Robinson.
would just add that I think it certainly has more weight to the select board or the school board if the request comes from the committee as opposed to one or two individuals looking for something.
Ms. Hopkins?
I would discuss that it feels more comfortable when the board has made a decision as opposed to an individual bringing information to us and piling it on and telling us something we need to know when we haven't even been aware of this information that we need to know.
I don't think that would prevent a member from supplying information to the committee.
I don't think anyone's asking to prevent a member. I think that we're asking if someone has information that they're seeking beyond what's been offered, that the committee chooses to vote whether or not we're seeking further information on that topic.
No, I understand that, okay, that's fine. Mr. Bilodeau, please.
So, I'm trying to understand, so if I were here last year, or any one of the members here last year, wanted to know more information from the school board or the health officer, that individual would simply call the health officer and say, I'm on the NBC and I want the information?
So historically, the way we've operated for at least the last 5-6 years, however long I've been on it, the NBC, if a member wants further information, they can make that request, and that request is, as far as I know, always been done in a meeting. So if a request from the town, say we get the town budget in preliminary format and somebody sees some information they're looking for that's missing, they would request it from the select board member. If we received information from the school board and somebody thumbed through it and thought something was missing or wanted more information, they request it through the school board member. When department heads come in to provide information for their budget, going through it as a committee, sometimes we find things lacking or more information we'd like supplied, then that request is made at that time. In the past, it is not required a majority vote of the committee to be able to get that information. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Spillane?
In essence, for the last 10 years or so since I've been on the board, if something was wanted because we're looking in the budget and find something is missing that we thought we should get some more information on, the difference between this motion and what we historically did is if I said, I'd like to see this, it only took me asking while we're here in this meeting, and that would be a formal request. The motion on the floor is to say, if I ask that, we have to take a vote now and see if a majority of people also want that, and if a majority of the people of the board don't want to see that information, then I can't get that information.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Dill
I'll
first.
yield to Andy.
Mr. Robertson?
I would just comment that one of the things we do at the Board of Selectmen pretty regularly is that before entertaining a motion, the chairman will say, is there any objection to this information request, or is there any objection to this? Is there general consensus? And if virtually everyone nods their head, raises their hand up, we don't formalize the procedure. And I think that could be done in lesser instances as well.
It's a unanimous consent.
Yeah.
Mr. Dill?
I believe that his motion was not for when a department head standing in front of here, not to ask the fire chief how many miles are on a fire truck, but that single members can't email the SAU for information. that it has to be, I, Mr. Dill of the Budget Committee, present a motion at the meeting that we request from the SAU this number.
Or this report.
One at a time. Mr. Langlois?
And I think it's important to recognize that this committee is in the similar fashion to the select board and the school board. The weight is not with the individual members. The weight of the committee is as a committee. The weight of the select board is not with an individual selectman. It is with the weight of the select board. Same applies to the school board. So those requests for additional information, which do utilize the town's resources and time, should carry the weight of the budget committee and not individual members.
Further discussion? So the only thing that I'll add is that if one desires further information, and a simple majority of the budget committee chooses to not be interested in that information for whatever reason, then the information will not be made available. I will disagree a little bit that, you know, if there's a department head that comes before us and somebody asks them for information that's not part of the packet, that the way this motion is worded would fall under the requirement for a vote. And so unanimous consent, just so we're clear on what these terms are, unanimous consent, which is a common tool, is simply to say, do we have unanimous consent? If one person objects, if one person says no, then it does have to go to a formal vote to move forward. So I'm going to vote no on this, and I'm going to vote no for two reasons. One, I think it becomes very cumbersome to try to get any information. And number two, I think it's very difficult to ask a member to vote yes or no on a line item or a budget without the background information that they feel is required to be able to make that decision in good faith. Mr. Dillich, you
Move
have
the
a comment?
question, please.
I'm sorry?
Motion to move the question.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Non-debatable. All in favor, raise your hand, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 7 to 3, no abstentions, motion passes. Any other new business? Mr. Langlois?
One final thing, in regards to Mr. Von Hassel's motion for setting time limits for individual members, I would move that we assign that responsibility to Mr. Von Hassel to keep track of the clock, for lack of a better term.
Mr. Von Hassel, would you be willing to accept that responsibility?
Sure.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, so it's 9-1. Just for point of clarification, if Mr. Von Hassel is unable to attend the meeting, how does the committee wish to handle that?
I volunteer to be the deputy timekeeper.
Okay, so you'll find someone amongst yourselves. So I'm going to leave it then, because I'm the dissenting vote, I'm going to leave it to the committee to arrange itself to supply a timer.
I have a
Mr.
great
Von-
app on my phone.
I would motion that the vice chair does it.
Second.
So wait a minute.
If I'm not here, the vice chair keeps the clock.
Okay, it's probably better if we just decide if you happen to be absent, who does it. Because
I
if
think that's
you're
what he's
not
saying.
here and he's not here, you
I
know,
withdraw my second then.
Yeah,
It can be a
that's fine.
suggestion as opposed to.
Shouldn't be that complicated.
I agree. Any other new business? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I bet baseball practice ended 10 minutes ago. Doesn't usually last till 7.
I need to save this document.
Andy, you not want that?
I do not.
Okay. No, I got one.